The silence in my own foyer was the first thing that struck me. A heavy, unnatural quiet that smelled of Lydia's cloying, expensive perfume. A scent that always reminded me of lilies at a funeral. I stood there, my hands trembling as I clutched a bag of groceries, watching two burly men in gray jumpsuits hoist my grandmother's mahogany writing desk toward the front door. Lydia didn't even turn around. She simply pointed a manicured finger toward the hallway, her voice as sharp and cold as a razor blade. "Take the Persian rug from the study next," she instructed the movers, her back to me. "It's far too fine a piece to be left in the hands of someone who doesn't know the difference between silk and polyester. The divorce papers are on the kitchen island, Elena. Don't bother looking for Mark. He's already moved his things into the penthouse, and by tomorrow morning, your access to the firm's accounts will be officially terminated." I felt the blood drain from my face, a cold, prickling sensation that started at my scalp and rushed down to my toes. The bag of groceries slipped from my numb fingers, a carton of eggs shattering on the marble floor with a sickening, wet thud. Lydia finally turned, her eyes sweeping over the mess at my feet with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Look at you!" she sneered, stepping daintily around the yellow yolk spreading across the stone. "Pathetic. You really thought a girl like you, a girl from a dusty little suburb with nothing but a degree and a dream, could actually belong in this family? You were a temporary convenience, a tool to build the brand. Now that the company is worth $50 million, we don't need the help anymore. You're nothing, Elena, just trash that's finally being taken out." 6 months ago, if anyone had told me that my life would end up in a cardboard box, I would have laughed in their face. Back then, I was living what I genuinely believed was a fairy tale. My life was a symphony of soft textures and golden light. I remember the mornings in our sun-drenched penthouse, the air smelling of freshly ground Arabica beans, and the expensive beeswax candles I insisted on lighting even at breakfast. I would sit at that very mahogany desk, the wood cool beneath my palms, sketching out the interior designs that had made Aura and Stone the most sought-after firm in the city. My husband, Mark, was the center of that world. He was the kind of man who seemed to radiate warmth, with a laugh that could fill a room and eyes that always seemed to be searching for mine. We met in our final year of university. I was the starving artist in the design studio, and he was the charismatic business major who sat in the front row of every lecture. We were a perfect match, or so I thought. I provided the vision, the soul, and the sweat. He provided the polish and the handshake. When we started the firm in a tiny, cramped basement apartment that smelled of damp wool and old paper, he used to hold me late at night and swear that one day I'd be the queen of the industry. "We're a team, Elle," he would whisper, his breath warm against my neck as we looked over our first meager contracts. "Your talent and my drive, nothing can stop us." And for 7 years, it seemed true. We climbed the ladder, rung by rung. I spent 18-hour days obsessing over fabric swatches, lighting grids, and floor plans. I was the one who stayed up until 3 in the morning to finish the blueprints for the Sterling Hotel, the project that finally put us on the map. Mark was always there with a glass of wine and a supportive word, his hand resting reassuringly on my shoulder. I trusted him with everything, my heart, my future, and the legal foundations of our company. Lydia, Mark's mother, had always been a peripheral figure in our early years, a sophisticated, somewhat icy woman who lived on a diet of black coffee and social status. She had run a small, prestigious PR firm that focused on old money clients, but as the economy shifted, her influence began to wane. 2 years ago, when she retired and her firm quietly folded, Mark suggested she join Aura and Stone as a consultant. "She has the connections, honey," Mark had argued one night over a dinner of grilled sea bass and vintage Chardonnay. The soft glow of the chandelier reflected in his eyes, making them look sincere and deep. "She knows the board members of every major developer in the state. She can get us through doors that are currently locked to us. Besides, she's family. Who can we trust more than my own mother?" I remember the slight hesitation I felt, a small, nagging instinct that I pushed down deep into the pit of my stomach. I wanted to be a good wife. I wanted to build a legacy. So, I welcomed her. I opened the doors of our sanctuary and let her in. At first, Lydia was helpful. She was efficient, organized, and possessed a terrifyingly sharp mind for contracts and branding. She brought an air of cold professionalism to the studio, replacing our cozy, creative chaos with sleek glass partitions and a strict hierarchy. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the atmosphere began to change. The smell of cedar and fresh flowers in the office was replaced by the oppressive, heavy scent of her perfume. She began to help with the books, her long, manicured nails clicking rhythmically on the keyboard, a sound that I now realize was the ticking of a time bomb. She started small, making subtle comments about my lack of business formal attire or the way I handled client meetings. "You're the artist, Elena," she would say with a thin, brittle smile that never reached her eyes. "You focus on the pretty pictures. Let Mark and me handle the messy details of the contracts. We want to protect you from the stress." Mark began to pull away too. The cozy dinners turned into late-night strategy sessions between him and his mother behind closed doors. When I would try to join, he would look up with a weary, tight smile. "Just boring numbers, Elle. Go get some rest. You have the Bergstrom presentation tomorrow." I felt like a guest in my own company, a ghost haunting the halls of the empire I had built with my own two hands. I told myself I was being paranoid, that this was just the price of success. I didn't realize that while I was designing dream homes for strangers, my own home was being dismantled, piece by piece, right under my feet. The shift in the atmosphere of our home wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, agonizing cooling, like a fire dying out in a room where the windows had been left slightly ajar. It started with the small things, the way Mark would suddenly lock his phone screen when I entered the room, or how the lively, wine-soaked dinners where we discussed our dreams were replaced by a heavy, transactional silence. Mark, who used to be my greatest confidant, became a ghost in our own house. He was physically there, but his eyes were always somewhere else, clouded with a restless, twitching anxiety. "Is everything okay at the office, Mark?" I asked one evening. I was sitting on the edge of our bed, the silk of my nightgown feeling suddenly too thin against the chill in the air. "You've been distant, and Lydia seems to be taking over the client calls I usually handle." Mark didn't look up from his tablet. His jaw tightened, a small muscle pulsing near his ear. "It's just a busy quarter, Elle. Lydia is just trying to take the pressure off you so you can focus on the creative side. She thinks your artistic temperament shouldn't be bogged down by the legalities of the new expansion. It's for your own good." "My artistic temperament?" I repeated, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. "I built this company's legal framework before Lydia even knew what a CAD drawing was. Why is she suddenly so concerned with my pressure?" "Can we not do this tonight?" he snapped, finally looking at me, but his eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth that used to make me feel invincible. "I'm tired, Elena. Just let it go." Then came the questions about my inheritance. My father had passed away 2 years prior, leaving me his Victorian estate on the coast, a sprawling, beautiful property that had been in my family for 3 generations. It was my sanctuary, the place where I went when the noise of the city became too loud. One afternoon, Lydia cornered me in the office break room, her silver jewelry clinking as she stirred a cup of herbal tea. "You know, Elena," she said, her voice smooth and practiced, "that coastal property is a dead asset. It's just sitting there, soaking up taxes. If you transferred it into the Aura and Stone corporate portfolio, we could use it as collateral for the new development loan. It would show the board that you're fully committed to the firm's future." I froze, the scent of her jasmine tea suddenly making me nauseous. "That house isn't an asset, Lydia. It's my home. It's not part of the business." She smiled then, a thin, predatory curve of her lips. "In this family, everything is part of the business. Don't be sentimental, dear. It's a weakness." I laughed it off at the time, but the seed of unease had taken root. A week later, I noticed a stack of mail on the foyer table that Mark had tried to hide under a catalog. It was a notice from our bank regarding a change of power of attorney. My heart skipped a beat. I waited until Mark was in the shower, my hands trembling as I pulled the document from the envelope. It was a request to remove my name as a primary signatory on our joint investment account. My breath hitched. My vision blurred for a second, the edges of the room darkening. I confronted him the moment he stepped out, the paper shaking in my hand. "What is this, Mark? Why are you trying to lock me out of our accounts?" He didn't even flinch. He just rubbed a towel over his hair, his voice flat. "It's a mistake, Elle. A clerical error by the bank. Lydia was supposed to be added as an observer, not replace you. I'll fix it on Monday. You're overreacting again." I wanted to believe him. I desperately needed to believe him. But the clerical errors kept mounting. The point of no return came on a Tuesday, a day that started with a deceptive, pale blue sky. Mark was at a site visit 3 hours away, and Lydia was supposedly at a spa retreat. I had stayed home with a lingering migraine, the kind that made every sound feel like a physical blow. I needed my tax documents from the previous year for a personal audit, and I knew Mark kept them in a fireproof safe in his home office. I knew the code, our anniversary, but when I punched it in, the red light flashed. He had changed it. A cold, heavy stone dropped into my stomach. I felt a surge of adrenaline that cut right through my headache. I tried his birthday. Nothing. Lydia's birthday? The safe clicked open. My hands were ice cold as I began to leaf through the folders. I wasn't looking for betrayal. I was looking for reassurance. I wanted to find the tax forms and prove to myself that I was just a paranoid wife. Instead, I found a thick, navy blue folder embossed with the logo of a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a document titled, "Strategic Asset Divestment and Marital Dissolution Plan." I felt the air leave my lungs. I sat on the floor, the cold hardwood biting into my legs, and began to read. It wasn't just a divorce plan, it was a blueprint for an execution. There were spreadsheets detailing every cent I had brought into the marriage, alongside forged gift deeds where I had supposedly signed over my family estate and my 50% stake in Aura and Stone to a holding company controlled entirely by Lydia. My signature was there. It looked exactly like mine. Every loop of the E, every sharp tail of the A. But I had never seen these papers in my life. The physical reaction was violent. My stomach churned, and I barely made it to the ensuite bathroom before I was sick. I leaned against the cool porcelain of the sink, gasping for air, watching my reflection in the mirror. My face was ashen, my eyes wide and bloodshot. The person looking back at me was a stranger, a woman who had been systematically erased by the people she loved most. I went back to the safe, my movements robotic and jerky. Under the divorce strategy, I found a series of private investigator reports on me. They had been tracking my movements for months, looking for any sign of instability or infidelity to use as leverage. There were photos of me meeting my sister for lunch, captioned as unidentified contact. Then, I saw the final blow. A memo from Lydia to Mark, dated only 2 days ago. "The papers are ready. Once she signs the updated insurance policy on Friday, she'll have officially signed away the last of the IP rights to the design algorithms. After that, she's just an expensive ghost. Tell her you're taking her for a weekend away to reconnect. We'll serve her at the hotel. It's cleaner that way." I didn't cry. The tears felt like they had been flash frozen inside my chest. I felt a strange, terrifying clarity. The man I had shared a bed with for a decade, the man who had held my hand at my father's funeral, was currently planning the cleanest way to strip me of my identity and my life's work. I took out my phone, my fingers hovering over the screen. I wanted to scream, to call him and howl my rage. But then I remembered Lydia's voice. Sentimentalism is a weakness. I realized then that if I acted like the victim they expected me to be, I would lose everything. I needed to be the trash they thought I was, the kind that gets under your skin and refuses to be swept away. I took a photo of every single page in that folder. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my teeth, a deafening, rhythmic thud. Just as I finished and slid the folder back into the safe, I heard the heavy clunk of the front door opening. "Elena, honey, are you home?" Mark's voice called out from the foyer, sounding bright, cheerful, and utterly, lethally fake. I stood there, the weight of the phone in my hand feeling like a loaded weapon. My heart was a frantic bird hammering against my ribs, and the air in the room felt thick, like I was breathing underwater. Mark stepped into the doorway of the office, his expensive wool coat still on, his face frozen in an expression that wasn't guilt, it was calculation. He saw the open safe. He saw the blue folder on the desk. "Elena," he said, his voice dropping an octave, losing all its manufactured cheer. "You weren't supposed to be in there." "I wasn't supposed to find out you were erasing me, you mean?" My voice was surprisingly steady, though my knees felt like they were made of glass. "I wasn't supposed to see the plan to steal my family's land, or the forgeries of my signature. Mark, look at me! How long has this been the plan?" He didn't look at me. He looked at the safe, then at the floor. He let out a long, weary sigh, as if he were the one being inconvenienced. "It's more complicated than it looks, Elle. We were trying to protect the company's liquidity. The firm is... We've had some setbacks. We needed the collateral." "The company?" I stepped toward him, the smell of the cold outside air clinging to his coat. "I am the company. I am the one who designs every single project that brings in the revenue. And you're talking about me like I'm a line item you can just delete." "You're an artist, Elena." A cold, sharp voice interrupted from behind him. Lydia stepped into the room, her presence immediately sucking the remaining warmth from the air. She didn't have her coat on. She must have been in the house already, waiting. "And artists are notoriously bad with numbers. You are dragging us down with your integrity and your refusal to cut corners." Mark and I had to make the hard decisions to ensure Aura and Stone survives. I looked from her to Mark. "Mark, say something. Tell her she's insane. Tell me you didn't agree to frame me for instability to take my shares." Mark finally looked up, but his eyes were empty. He didn't move toward me. He didn't reach for my hand. He just stood there, his arms crossed, a stranger in my husband's skin. "Mother is right about the direction of the firm, Elle. We're moving toward large-scale development. We need a different kind of leadership, a more aggressive one." "Aggressive?" I choked out a laugh that felt like a sob. "You mean criminal? You forged my name!" "Try to prove it," Lydia said, stepping closer, her perfume, that cloying jasmine, filling my lungs until I felt lightheaded. She leaned in, her voice a low, venomous hiss. "The papers are already filed with the holding company, and before you think about running to a lawyer, you should know that those creative accounting errors we found in the Sterling project, the ones that resulted in a $2 million tax discrepancy, they all have your digital signature on them. If you fight us, we don't just take the house and the company, we send you to prison." The room spun. I felt the bile rise in my throat again. The tax errors. I remembered Lydia asking for my login credentials months ago to update the software. I had trusted her. I had given her the keys to my cage. "You planned this from the moment you joined the firm," I whispered, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. "I planned for my son's success," Lydia corrected, her eyes gleaming with a terrifying triumph. "And you were always an obstacle. A girl like you, with your middle-class morals and your sentimentality, you were never going to be enough for a man of Mark's potential." "And what about you, Mark?" I turned to him, my voice breaking. "Is this what you want? To throw me away like trash? After 10 years?" Mark looked away again, staring at a spot on the wall behind me. "I told you, Elle. Let's just make this clean. Sign the remaining IP waivers, and I'll make sure you get a small monthly stipend. You can go live in that old house of yours for a few years until the dust settles." "The house you're currently trying to steal from me?" I asked, my voice rising. "We're not stealing it," Lydia snapped. "We're reallocating it. And besides," she paused, a cruel, mocking smile playing on her lips, "it's not like you'll be lonely. I'm sure your replacement will be happy to send you photos of how she redecorates this place. My heart stopped. My replacement? Lydia chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. Oh, Mark didn't tell you? Sarah, our new head of acquisitions? She's been Mark's consultant in more ways than one for the last 8 months. She's already pregnant, Elena, with a boy, a real heir for the firm. Not like the disappointment you've been. I felt the world shatter. The late-night strategy sessions, the business trips, the way Mark had stopped touching me. It wasn't the stress of work. It was her, the woman they had hired to help me with the expansion. I looked at Mark, waiting for a denial, a flicker of shame, anything. But he remained paralyzed, his silence the loudest confession of all. He wouldn't even meet my gaze. He stood there, a coward hiding behind his mother's skirt while they dismantled my soul. Get out, I said, the words barely a whisper. Excuse me? Lydia arched a perfectly groomed eyebrow. Get out! I screamed, the sound tearing from my chest. Get out of my office! Get out of my sight! Lydia didn't flinch. She just smoothed her skirt. Fine. We're leaving for dinner anyway. To celebrate Sarah's ultrasound. You have until tomorrow morning to sign those papers, Elena. If you don't, the police will be here by noon to discuss those tax discrepancies. Don't be a fool. You've already lost. You're nothing now. Just trash we're finally throwing out. They walked out together, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind them. I sank to the floor, my forehead resting against the cool wood of the desk. The silence of the house was deafening. I was surrounded by the beautiful things I had curated, the life I had built, and all of it was a lie. I felt the edges of my mind starting to fray, the sheer scale of the betrayal threatening to pull me under into a black, bottomless hole. I stared at the shattered eggs on the marble in the foyer, the yellow yolk drying in the dim light. Trash. That's what she called me. That's what they thought I was. But then, something shifted. Deep inside, under the layers of shock and the crushing weight of the heartbreak, a tiny, cold spark of rage began to flicker. It wasn't the hot, screaming rage of a moment ago. It was something else, something older, something sharp. I looked at my phone, still clutched in my hand. I looked at the photos of the documents I had taken. My eyes landed on a specific page in the divestment plan, a list of offshore accounts used for the reallocation. I realized then that Lydia was so blinded by her own arrogance, so convinced of my weakness, that she had forgotten one very important thing. I wasn't just the artist. I was the one who had built the firm's digital infrastructure. I was the one who had set up the encrypted servers. And I knew exactly where the skeletons were buried, because I was the one who had built the closets. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, my movements slow and deliberate. The shaking stopped. The tears dried. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of ice-cold water. Trash, Lydia? I whispered to the empty, elegant room. Let's see who gets picked up by the morning. The coldness that settled over me wasn't a lack of feeling. It was a precision I hadn't known I possessed. I didn't waste the night crying. Instead, I sat in the blue glow of my laptop, my fingers flying across the keys with a rhythmic, lethal intent. Lydia and Mark had forgotten that I was the one who designed the firm's internal project tracking software. They saw it as a tool for organization. I knew it was a digital ledger that recorded every change, every login, and every forged metadata tag. By 3 a.m., I had what I needed. The digital fingerprints of Lydia's assistant accessing my account to sign those divestment papers. I made the call at 7 a.m. Not to Mark, and not to the police, not yet. I called Arthur Vance. He had been my father's attorney for 30 years, a man who looked like a kindly grandfather but possessed the legal instincts of a great white shark. Elena, child, he said, his voice gravelly with sleep. It's early for a social call. It's not a social call, Arthur, I said, my voice sounding like grinding stones. I need you to look at a series of shell company transfers. And Arthur, I want to trigger the moral turpitude clause in the partnership agreement my father insisted on when we incorporated. There was a long silence on the other end. I told your father that clause would be your ultimate shield one day. Give me 2 hours. By 10 a.m., I was standing in the glass-walled boardroom of Aura and Stone. I hadn't changed into the business formal Lydia demanded. I wore my favorite oversized cashmere sweater and jeans, the clothes of the woman who actually did the work. Lydia was already there, looking radiant in a cream-colored suit, sipping espresso. Mark sat beside her, looking gray and exhausted, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere near his shoes. Next to him was Sarah, the head of acquisitions, her hand resting possessively on Mark's arm. She gave me a look of pity that made my skin crawl. "You're late, Elena," Lydia said, sliding a thick stack of papers across the mahogany table. "Sign these, and we can all move on. No drama, no police, just a clean break." I didn't sit down. I walked to the head of the table and leaned on the back of the chair. "I'm not signing anything, Lydia, but I did bring some light reading for the board members who are currently joining us via video link." I pressed a button on my remote, and the massive screen on the wall flickered to life. It wasn't the waiver. It was a forensic map of the company's accounts, showing a direct pipeline of embezzled funds moving from the Sterling project into a private account held in Lydia's name, an account she used to pay off the debts of her failed PR firm. Lydia's face turned the color of damp chalk. This is a fabrication. Mark, do something." Mark looked at the screen, then at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. He said nothing. The silence of the husband, once a comfort, was now his ultimate confession of cowardice. "The tax discrepancies you tried to pin on me?" I continued, my voice gaining strength. "They weren't errors, they were your footprints. And because you used the firm's servers to forge my signature, you've committed wire fraud. Arthur is currently on the phone with the district attorney, but before they get here, there's the matter of the ownership." I turned to Sarah, who had pulled her hand away from Mark as if he were suddenly radioactive. "And as for the heir you're carrying, I hope he inherits his mother's ambition and not his father's backbone. But he won't be inheriting this company." "You can't kick us out," Lydia hissed, her composure finally shattering. "I am the majority stakeholder of the holding company." "The holding company that was funded using my father's estate as illegal collateral." I smiled, and for the first time in months, it felt real. "That's called fraudulent inducement. Arthur triggered the clause. As of 10 minutes ago, your shares have been frozen, and the board has voted to remove you and Mark effective immediately. You aren't reallocating my life, Lydia. You're being evicted from it." The double doors at the back of the room opened. 2 men in dark suits entered, not movers this time, but investigators from the Financial Crimes Division. Lydia began to scream, a high, thin sound of pure, impotent rage. She called me every name in the book, her polished mask falling away to reveal the hollow, desperate woman underneath. "You're nothing!" she shrieked as they led her toward the door. "You're just trash!" I waited until she was level with me. I leaned in close, the scent of her jasmine perfume no longer intimidating, just pathetic. "The thing about trash, Lydia," I whispered, "is that eventually the sun comes out and everyone can see exactly what's rotting. Enjoy the smell." Mark tried to stop me as I walked toward the elevator. He reached for my arm, his face twisted in a mask of simulated heartbreak. "Elle, please. I was just trying to keep the peace. I love you. We can fix this." I looked at his hand on my sleeve, then up at his face. I felt a profound sense of detachment, as if I were looking at a piece of furniture I had outgrown. "The only thing you love, Mark, is a life you didn't have the courage to build yourself. Don't call me again." 6 months later, the air was thick with the scent of salt and blooming gorse. I sat on the porch of my father's Victorian house, a sketchpad in my lap and a mug of steaming tea by my side. The house was mine, fully, legally, and spiritually. The lawsuit had been grueling, but Lydia's company was in receivership, and she was currently awaiting trial. Mark had fled to another state, his reputation in the industry incinerated by the scandal. Sarah, I heard, had left him the moment the bank accounts were frozen. The silence here was different. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the penthouse. It was the quiet of a life being rebuilt on a foundation of truth. I looked out at the ocean, the waves hitting the rocks with a steady, rhythmic power. I had lost a husband and a business partner, but I had found the woman who had designed them both into existence. I realized that they hadn't taken anything that truly belonged to me because they could never steal my talent or my resolve. I picked up my charcoal pencil and began to draw the outline of a new project, a sanctuary for women who had lost their way. I smiled, a small, private closing of a chapter. Betrayal is a fire. It can either turn you to ash, or it can forge you into something that no one will ever be able to break again. I took a sip of my tea, the warmth spreading through my chest, and turned the page.